Yes, hello once again. Thanks for re-tuning to Classic Dirt Bike TV, where we do our very best to feature more of those old school vintage scramblers from the 1950s right up to those relatively modern bikes of the early 1990s. So if you're into your old vintage classics, then you've certainly come to the right place to see them here on CDB TV. So right now we're going to take a look at a bike that actually wasn't a machine at all originally, and this particular bike was built using spare parts from various sources, and this bike was all put together by ex-Maico and Kramer works rider Keith Ree. So let's dive straight into the video clip and take a look at Terry Pickering's 1971 360 Square Barrel Maico. Okay, so our featured 1971 360 Square Barrel Maico is yet another one of the fantastic bikes from the Terry Pickering off-road collection, and this video here is an updated version of the clip that I posted on this bike some years ago. Now once again, and as in some of the previous bikes that we've featured from Terry's collection of off-roaders, this Maico here was never really an original bike at all, because this machine was all put together using various motorcycle parts from Terry's warehouse of old motocross components. Now Terry just happens to be in a position where he has a vast selection of classic vintage and twin shock frames, motors and other quite rare parts that he then uses to reincarnate some of those long lost motocross bikes from our racing past. So in that respect, Terry's a very good source of material here for Classic Dirt Bike TV, and I've already posted quite a few of Terry's projects here in the past, so we're looking forward to showcasing more of his superb motorcycles in the coming weeks and months. So when Terry first got the idea to put this bike together, he scoured his parts bins to see if he had enough original Maico parts to build the 71 360, and surprisingly enough he did have most of the components that he required, although some of the other bits and pieces that he didn't have he would have to source from other suppliers. But normally, if Terry's not too busy, he usually just cracks on and builds these bikes himself, although with already being in the process of building a couple of other very rare bikes, he then passed on the task of building this 360 to his classic bike building expert and friend Keith Ree. Now again, Keith is certainly no stranger to these Maico off-roaders, as he did ride them professionally back in the day, and he was also a works factory rider for the German Kramer motorcycle company. So in that respect, Keith's the very man to take on this bike building project. So to begin with, the old 1971 Maico frame that came from Terry's warehouse was chosen to be used as the chassis for this new bike build, so it was all inspected for any signs of damage, and anything that needed attention was then repaired before finally being stripped of its old black colour and then repainted once again. But this very light tubular steel chassis was quite strong and could certainly take a lot of track punishment, and it was relatively light in its construction, so it made this two-stroke 360 quite easy to throw around a motocross racetrack. And so when it came to finding an engine for Terry's new bike build, Keith just simply raided Terry's parts bins, and he more or less found every single part that he needed to put this 360 engine together, although there were one or two components that he just couldn't locate, and these again would have to be found from outside suppliers. But anyhow, once all of the associated parts were all gathered together, these were all inspected for any signs of wear or damage, and any remedial work that was needed to them was then carried out before they were all being passed fit to be used in this motor's internals. But you can certainly see how these big 360s got their Square Barrel tag from, and these did have quite a big surface area for just a 360 motor, but of course not as big as its slightly larger brother, the big 501 Maico, which was just a big brute of an engine, although these 360s were still very powerful, but they were much more manageable than its bigger 501 brother. And as I remember, I'm pretty sure that there were 250s, 400s, and as I mentioned, 501 versions of these Square Barrel Maico motors offered in the early 1970s. And by all accounts, these were very good engines for their time, and it was just a year later that Maico then swapped from the Square Barrel cylinder onto the radial fin barrels that we are now more familiar with today. But one of the features of these Maico motors was that to operate the clutch on these Square Barrel engines, the clutch arm was at this time at the bottom of the clutch casing, which was surprising considering that this could easily be damaged by stones or other obstacles on the track, although it wouldn't be too long before Maico then placed this clutch arm on the top of the casing on its future Maico motors. But to keep that big 360 fed with its fuel, we have a 36mm Bing carburetor. No fancy reed valve blocks on these motors, of course. These were just a simple piston port engine, but again, most of these German Maicos did come from the factory with these Bing carburetors fitted, and as I've said in previous videos, you just can't beat a Bing for making power, just as long as you get them set up and jetted just right. Although, as you can guess, this 360 engine was given the full rebuild treatment by Keith, and most of its internals were either renewed or refurbished. So essentially what we have now is a completely as brand new 360 Maico motor, and many of the bike's other smaller parts like these original footrests and rear brake lever were also renovated during the rebuild process. Now, one of the parts that Keith never had to complete the build of the engine was a decent exhaust and tailpipe, and new or even old battered second-hand items were almost impossible to find for these 71s, but after many weeks of searching and browsing the internet, Keith, believe it or not, just managed to track down an original 71 pipe from a supplier in the USA, which was then of course purchased and shipped to the UK to be bolted onto the bike. And eventually, once that the engine was fitted with its brand new expansion chamber and tailpipe, that more or less took care of the engine build side of our 360 restoration. So as we move on to the front end of our Maico build, where Keith once again raided Terry's parts bins, and he found just the right model of front forks to fit onto this new bike build project, and these were completely dismantled and refurbished before being rebuilt with brand new seals, etc. But these weren't painted in the end and just left in this nice clean alloy finish. Now, a brand new pair of fork gaiters were also fitted to keep the crud and the debris from ruining the fork seals, and you may also notice in this clip that Terry's also not got a front brake cable on this hub, because at the time of taking these clips and pictures, Terry was actually waiting on a new front brake cable being delivered from a supplier. Again, moving on to the back end of our 360, we have a pair of modern day classic suspension units supplied by Hagen Shocks here in the UK. But back in 1971, I'm pretty sure that it would have been a pair of old Coney suspension units that would have been bolted onto the back of these 71 bikes, but certainly these Hagens will be of much better quality than the old Coneys of that period. But quite a substantial rear sprocket on our 360, just to get the gearing all right for that Maico motor, and both this rear and the front wheels are the stock Maico items, and these have been rebuilt with brand new heavy duty stainless steel spokes onto the refurbished front and rear Maico hubs. Now again, thankfully, Terry just happened to have a stock original 1971 Maico fiberglass fuel tank in his inventory of old classic bike parts, and although the tank was in pretty dire shape when it was found, Keith then worked his magic once again and brought it back to life, whereby it now looks more or less like brand new. And once it was finished off with its newly re-chromed fuel cap and a set of sparkly new Maico graphics, it was now shining like the proverbial new pin. Now, when it came to sorting out a seat for the 71 360, an old original seat base was then found, and this was used as a template to then form a brand new one, which was then mated up with a new foam insert before finally being finished off with this custom made seat cover. And although this wasn't an original, it certainly looked the part, and it fitted the chassis almost perfectly. Now, if my ageing memory serves me correctly, I'm pretty sure that these front and rear mudguards on our Maico back in 1971 more than likely would have been made of fiberglass at that time, but I'm guessing here that this time round these replica mudders that are fitted onto our bike are plastic copies of that original design, and those other parts like this airbox and the chassis side panels are also plastic equivalents to those brittle fiberglass components from 71. And so moving on to the pilot seat of our 360 bike, we have the correct Maico handlebars for that period, all nicely re-chromed and shiny once again, and these are complemented by a pair of alloy Magura ball end levers, which were very popular during the early 1970s, and these are protected by these very nice Magura lever and cable covers, just to help stop dirt and moisture from fouling the workings. And once again we have a decent throttle gasser there just to help control all of the ponies waiting to be unleashed from that 360 piston port Maico motor. Now the front number plate is just a stock plastic off-road item that's quite easily available from any off-road motorcycle shop. Now motocross bike testers and journalists who tried these 71 360s on the track way back in the day had nothing but positive feedback on their performance and their handling, and even that well-respected dirt bike journalist Rick Simon was once quoted as saying that it was like cheating when you slung your leg over one of these Maicos in that year, as these were far superior to the competition of its day. Although when you consider that this 360 was never actually a bike at all until Terry got the idea to put one together, and it's quite amazing to think that Terry had most of the parts to build it all lying around in boxes in his dirt bike warehouse. But it's thanks to Keith Ree and all of his hard work and bike building skills that he's now rescued another old classic from the off-road boneyard. Although, as I said, that old 360 there is just one of the many off-road classics that Terry has in his fantastic collection of old scramblers, and I've already posted videos of some of Terry's other machines here on my channel, and without doubt I'm certainly looking forward to seeing what other motocross gems Terry has tucked away in his Aladdin's cave of scrambling memorabilia. Well, there you have it. I do hope you enjoyed that look around Terry Pickering's lovely 1971 360 Square Barrel Maico. As I said, a bike that wasn't really a bike at all originally, but was put together by legendary Kramer works rider Keith Ree. But we will be featuring more of these old classics from Terry's collection in the coming weeks and months. So coming up next here on CDB TV, we're going to take a look at a bike that was not that well known around the late 1980s, but in America these machines did have a bit of iconic status at the time. So when we return to Classic Dirt Bike TV, we'll be taking a look at this quite nice looking 1989 ATK 250. Now these old ATKs were absolutely bristling with innovations for motocross, and of course these bikes were all the brainchild of legendary designer and engineer Horst Leitner. So we'll be taking a look at this 89 250 ATK when we return to Classic Dirt Bike TV. So once again, thanks for taking the time to view my video channel, and if these are the kind of bikes that you like to look at here on YouTube, then please consider subscribing to my channel. So until the next time, watch what you're doing on those old vintage dirt bikes, and I hope you'll come back to my channel very soon to see more of these old school vintage dirt bikes right here on your favourite CDB TV channel.